But it is, I know it's on Amazon. I saw that.
Yes, it is, and barnesandnoble.com.
Okay. And is it on just on paperback or is it
Ebooks as well.
Oh,
Kindle.
that's great.
You
Okay.
to discover your mission. A brand new
And we don't have to spend too much time
monthly
talking
video
about it.
series
Yeah,
featuring
okay.
engaging
We'll talk a
Catholic
little bit,
speakers
yeah.
who will challenge you to live your life abundantly. For only $25 a month, you will receive a personal monthly mission, including 3 full-length inspirational talks that build upon a new theme each month. Sign up for the Discover Your Mission tier at patreon.com/patchworkheartministry today.
Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry present Journeys in Faith. Now, here's Ann DeSantis.
Hi, welcome to Journeys in Faith here on this Friday evening on Fiat Ministry Network. Great to be here. And I have another amazing guest. I have Peter Cavallaro. He is a husband, a father, an author, and an apologist. Welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, Ann.
It really is. You have an amazing story of faith, and you are also the author of the book Fragments. We're going to talk about that later on in the show. I thought we could start out with your own faith journey. And it is so interesting because you're on fire for your faith. So we're very grateful to have you here on this evening.
Absolutely. I love talking about my faith. I love hearing about the faith journeys of others. I think, there's nothing more comforting, whether it's spirituality or anything, than to hear someone else's experiences and realize that it's, something that resonates with you and that, we're all in the same boat. And so I'm always happy to talk about my own faith journey. I was born into a devout Catholic family, and I was very blessed to have a number of individuals who were close with the church, people I could look to for inspiration. But I think in some ways, the faith journey of someone like me, who I think is many people in the Catholic Church, is a little trickier than the journey of someone who's born outside the faith and then later in life on their own volition chooses to come into the faith, because obviously that's a big leap. But once they've made that leap, they've already taken ownership of what they believe. They've already self-affirmed in a very radical way that this is the creed that I want to devote my life to. This is what I want to follow for the rest of my life. For people that are born into the church, I think the challenge is to find a way to make it your own, to make sure that you're not just on autopilot and that you're thinking about why it is that these beliefs are so important, to make sure that it's not just the faith of your parents, the faith of your family, but to really know that it's come into your heart sort of as a matter of your choice. And so that to me was the challenge when I was starting to come of age. And I was very blessed again to have, the advantages of a great faith-filled home and close links to the church. And I think at least the good news is that, with faith, we're chasing an object, God, who's not just sitting back and waiting for us to find him. He's coming after us with even more velocity than we're going after him. And, I think in a lot of ways, God will come down and meet us on our own terms, at our own level, the same way that a parent will when they want to bond with their own child. And so that, in my experience, is kind of how I found myself on my own terms encountering the Lord. Think about like a father who, maybe wants to bond with his teenage son, and wants to have deeper conversations with the son, and is a little disappointed that they're not as close, the father will think of the settings and think of the experiences that will most resonate with the son and use those as the way to make that connection. So maybe the son's into sports, the father will buy a pair of baseball tickets and take him out to the ball game, or will take him to the park and they'll shoot basketball hoops. And that's the context in which that bond will happen. And so God, I think, in the same way, comes to us in the context and through the means that are most hospitable to us based on what we're into. And so, I think there's no one place or one way in which we can find God. I think it's the exact opposite. God can be found in almost any place through almost any activity that we can imagine. And because human beings are eclectic by nature, we have so many diverse interests and opportunities and experiences. God kind of ends up coming at us from all sides. And so then the challenge just becomes being perceptive to God's presence in even the most unlikely of places, and being open to that outreach from God, even if it's unexpected. So going back to me, I'm coming of age, and I'm wanting to, find God. Where do I find God? And I end up finding God in a series of places that are at home to me. These are the places that God is meeting me, because it's where, that connection can happen. And so I think the first place where I found God and I had that feeling of authentic personal connection with God was just through the warmth and love that I had with my family. I have a big Italian family, a very close knit, extended family, grandparents and everything. And I found God in those relationships. And I found God present in those relationships. And then the next place I found God was through creativity. I'm a very creative person. I've got a lot of creative pursuits. I love to write. I love to design things. And in that creative process, I found God there too. And then I found God in nature. I love wildlife photography and hiking and just natural beauty in general. And, through nature's beauty and through sort of spending time outdoors, I also found a connection with God. But I think the most unlikely or unexpected of places, but the most welcome connection I made with God for me was through philosophy, intellectual pursuits. I found God in the tenets and the teachings of the Catholic Church, because I'm a very cerebral person. I'm academically oriented. I'm a thinker. That's just the way I am. So when I got to college, and that's the time where I think people generally are at the stage where they want to put things together and think about what it all means and what this world is all about, what life is all about. If I didn't find God to my satisfaction in the head as well as the heart, I would have been someone who probably would have been a little dissatisfied. And I might have, gone down the path of, we see it a lot, atheism, agnosticism. But when I got into my studies and, pursued philosophy and did some writing in that regard, I was very pleased to discover that God was waiting for me there as well. And so I think that, my faith journey, if God is water, my faith journey can best be described as me realizing I'm swimming in the ocean. That's how I would say it.
I love how you articulated everything. It makes me also think of how everyone is different, whether they are opened up to God through truth, beauty, or goodness. I wondered if you had anything to say there, because you mentioned almost all three in your description.
Yeah. Again, I think God comes to us and he's got a knack for just knowing the best way to make that connection. And I think that, I guess truth is definitely, that is sort of another way of saying sort of the philosophy angle. I was someone who I was pursuing truth. I was seeking to understand what things are all about to my satisfaction. And, maybe the way to say it is, God, I found out that God is really the ultimate source of truth. God is really the only satisfactory source of truth. And so for me, that got me a good way that really, I got a lot of mileage out of sort of that realization. And that to this day really fortifies my faith.
I think you're a great example for not only people your own age, and I know you've told me before that you are a millennial, but for people of all ages, including my own. So I thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. I wondered if you had anything to say, because it's a known fact that people in your own age category are not really attending Mass as they did in years past, and that church attendance among millennials and younger has gone down. And I'm sure, especially in this last year. Would you have any words of advice to anyone watching who is sort of on the verge of deciding whether or not they want to continue with their faith and maybe feeling somewhat discouraged?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely sobering facts that you mentioned. I mean, they are well documented, and it's been a trend for a while. And by the way, that's part of what motivates me to be a little bit more upfront about, where I'm coming from and what I believe, because I do think it helps to kind of, reach out to those sort of at my own stage in life. I mean, yeah, for people in that situation that you described, I mean, I would think deeply on sort of what I've said, which is that, there's no right way or wrong way to encounter God. God is sort of, you have to try hard not to find God, in your life. He's around every corner. And so, I wouldn't focus too much on the right way to have that authentic encounter with God. I think the good news is that, through everyone's interests and experiences and activities, God is waiting for them in some way to make that connection. And so I think they should pursue, or they should seek God in even the small, ordinary details of life. And as to sort of that potential weakening of a connection with the church between people my age and, the church, I would say, as kids, we think of, there's a tendency to think of church as sort of, or, all liturgical things as sort of just like, the same way you might think of homework. It's sort of this dour, dreary thing. But I think that you actually can draw great comfort in the liturgy once you, I guess, realize that it's a place, to encounter. God is basically really alive and present in, under that roof with you. I mean, it's not just sort of checking off boxes. It's a venue for a very real and special encounter with God that I think, I personally have been enriched by time and time again.
Yeah, that's awesome, because any reflections on why we believe always helps us to keep going, doesn't it? Because I think all of us get discouraged, and especially this past year, for a lot of people, there's been some discouragement with continuing on the faith journey, especially when we weren't able to get to Mass. So I thank God that at least in my own archdiocese here, things are somewhat normal, other than the fact that Mass has not been completely, made mandatory yet. But I know that hopefully throughout this winter, and as we go into the warmer weather, things will be, quote, back to normal. What are your thoughts on what has happened this past year as far as the church and, moving forward?
Look, it's been a challenge that I don't think any of us imagined we'd live through, and, really is unprecedented. And it, I think, does put a bit of a strain on, our personal relationships with God. I mean, for those of us for whom, going to Mass and participating in the liturgy and regular receipt of the sacraments was a vital part of our connection with God, and having that kind of interrupted because of just external factors, it forces us to sort of really recreate, to the best of our ability, a sustained, routinized way of engaging with God. One way I describe it, for anyone who's been in a long distance relationship, when my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was living in a different state, and I was away at school, when you're in a long distance relationship, or even a long distance friendship with someone, as I always say, that relationship lives or dies based on the quality of the communication and the regularity and depth of the correspondence between these remote people. I mean, our relationship with God in some ways is permanently like that, because there is obviously some barrier to, having a face-to-face with God in a literal sense. We need the regularity and the earnestness of communication with God in order for that relationship to remain vibrant. And so recent events this year, I think, made that more true than ever, because it was really up to us. We didn't have the aid of, the greater community to sort of, buoy ourselves.
Amen. I like the word routinized, and I think that's a good word for all of us, because even if your diocese or archdiocese hasn't made Mass kind of an obligatory yet, we can always routinize our prayer life. We can always routinize our awareness of God in our lives, as you talked about the different ways that God speaks to us all the time. I think another way that God speaks to us is through our vocation. Now, you're a millennial, you are a married man with a little child, your wife, Alexandra, your son, Peter, who's 16 months old. There they are. Beautiful picture there. I love that. He is adorable. And your wife is beautiful. Let's talk about that. I mean, you have an amazing family, and obviously God has come so much into your life through your own family life and through your vocation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I like the word vocation. It is a great word to describe, not just someone who's obviously called to, religious order. Vocation, we're all called to vocations of all sorts. And it's up to us to discern it. And I actually think the even more profound fact is that actually we're all called to multiple vocations. I wear different hats. And some hats I'm always wearing, some hats I'm wearing on top of other hats. Sometimes I have 5 hats on at once. But yes, I think there's no more important vocation to my mind than, and now it's recent, but fatherhood and also as a husband. And I mean, there's certain things that I think, sort of beyond any doubt, you just know, and you don't have to, overthink it or prove it or, and for me, at least, beyond any doubt, there's no doubt that, when they say this is what you're put on this earth to do, I mean, when you're raising a child and you're nurturing a Christian family, I mean, I think that you don't need to be in doubt as to, your, I guess, service of God's plan. I mean, it's just a great feeling of knowing that you're really following the path that is honoring God.
Exactly. I agree with you completely. And I just also commend you that you are so rooted in your vocation, and you know what's important at a young age. Not everybody realizes that at your age. So I just appreciate that. And I appreciate that you also said some words to people your own age and younger about God, about relationship with him, and vocation too. Now, you're a father, and fatherhood is a vocation. And I know that your son is only 16 months old, but can you tell our viewers, what is it like to be a father for those who aren't dads yet?
Well, it's kind of like when you jump into a frozen ocean or lake or whatever, and you're sort of like, when you're standing on the dock, you're kind of like, I don't know, like, I don't know how to jump in on my own. Like, I'm hesitating, whatever. You just do it. You jump in, and as soon as you're in, you're happy that you're there, and you realize that this is what you wanted to do. It was just taking the leap, taking the step. Could be a little intimidating, but no, it's an absolute blessing. No matter how physically demanding it is, mentally exhausting it can be at times. It speaks to how profound. That's another thing. I guess it brings us closer to God in the sense that we experience a profundity of love that we never even knew we could exercise until you can direct that love toward a child of yours. It's almost like like when someone is in an emergency situation, they exercise muscles or strength that they never even thought they had. There's this love, and there's this capacity for love inside of us that you don't even have the ability to exercise until you can channel it toward a child. And in that way, I feel closer to God, because obviously God, there's one of the most perplexing things about God is how he can love us so boundlessly, no matter how flawed we are and whatever, something that we could never do because we're imperfect. But I think it gives me just a little bit of a glimpse into what God's love for us must be like.
Yeah, I love that word glimpse. It's so true. And I'm sure that the words that you spoke also, people who are parents understand exactly where you're coming from. I know I do. I'm kind of hoping my daughters are watching, because some of those words that you used are words right from my own heart to my own family and my kids. So thank you so much. So tell us a little bit about what is it like to be the dad of a child his age? Because I know that is an active age. He's 16 months old.
Very active, always moving, running around. He was an early walker, which I should have known because I have the family record of walking at 9 months. And I think he was walking at 10 months. So it's still pretty early. And he kind of skipped walking. He went to running, and also can never take your eyes off him. And he is I don't have too many data points to go by, so I can't say whether he's on the high or low spectrum, but I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, he is shamelessly needy. He always needs attention. He can't play quietly by himself in a corner. He wants someone, preferably both people or any number of people in the room, to be watching and applauding him. And so, and it requires a lot more compromises of our own personal lives, and my wife and I, sharing other responsibilities and taking shifts. So definitely a huge life adjustment. And I'm one of the first of my friends to have a kid. So I'm kind of a trailblazer here with them.
Yeah, I can't stop smiling, honestly, because I love that age. And I love when I see people your age who embark on parenthood and brings back so many wonderful memories. And you're such a great example to you and your wife. And that brings me to the subject of faith in the family. Now, I know he's only 16 months old, but I don't know if you have introduced any kind of like nighttime prayer as a family, or has he been exposed to anything about his faith? I know that when my kids were little, I used to read them little board books that had something to do with God or Jesus or faith.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, one thing you'll find when you have a kid is there's a variety of things that kind of just hit you, and you realize you got to come up with what's your view on this, like what's your view on sugars, what's your view on TV time, what's your view on 1,000 things, but obviously nothing close to being as important as faith formation. And yes, we do have, again, getting back to the idea of routinized, we do have a routine that we exercise so I guess there's two types of things that we've done. First is we have a routine, which I expect will evolve as he evolves. Currently it's a series of prayers with him. And that's sort of and we'll get more into books, I guess, when he's getting a little older. We've got a lot of great ones. But then another piece of it, I think, is sort of building the environment that will hopefully supplement the faith formation that we'll actively be doing by, I guess, what we have a few things. Firstly, we have sort of in the house, imagery, visual wise, wanting to provoke conversations about what this is and who that is, and why this is up in a place of prominence. And then also audio wise, we have a playlist, prayerful playlist of music that we are, playing and starting to play. And I think, again, just to kind of build on all fronts, sort of this totality of an environment that he'll just kind of come up in with, which I think will be bolstering of his faith. And then, of course, I guess another important component that's less relevant now, but will be, I guess, very relevant soon is sort of on the negative side is, blocking out or just paying attention to, I guess, negative influences in that regard as well, which I guess hasn't been as much of a thing we've been doing so far.
No, I agree with you completely. And on a side note, I homeschooled my kids, so I do understand what you mean about the negative influences. And especially in today's world. So now we have a whole lot more to talk about, and we're not going to take a break quite yet, but pretty soon. I thought before we take a break, you mentioned before the show started that you are a fan of the saints. I wondered if you could talk about one or two of your favorites.
Very hard. I love the saints. Well, let me say why I love the saints first. I mean, and I think Catholicism is so rich and textured. There's so many depths to our faith. There's really no amount of stuff is too much. I mean, we have so much that I think augments what's under the rubric of the Catholic Church. But in my view, nothing is more enriching than our catalog of saints. And I think that virtually any saint you want to dive into and read about and dissect their life, you're going to get, so much advantage from it. I mean, so much inspiration. It's in my mind, one of the most uplifting and effective devotional activities that work for me, because the saints are such a inspiring cast of characters, and there's really a saint for everybody. There's a saint that everybody will resonate with, in terms of their life situation, their achievements. So in terms of picking out saints, very difficult, because you got to get me on, it depends on the day. But I mean, I guess a few standbys is probably my number one saint is Thomas Aquinas, because he is really the architect of Christian, of really the Catholic Church's present dogma, and it's the synthesis of philosophy with theology. It's very important for what I'm interested in academically. I also have a special connection with St. Thomas More, because my day job is I'm an attorney. St. Thomas More I relate to because he's a public figure, legal scholar, distinguished lawyer, but he never leaves his faith at the door, and it infuses everything he does. And so I'll just give those two Thomases as just a very tip of the iceberg of the saints that inspire me.
No, I agree with you. I love both of them. In fact, the homeschooling program that I used for my daughters was St. Thomas Aquinas Academy.
There you go.
And to give a little commercial there for them. But yeah, so I agree with you on both of those saints. And now we do have to take a short break. We have a whole lot more to talk about, because you are also a Catholic author, and I would love to talk about your writing and about also how you got on the journey of writing too. So we'll be back here on Journeys in Faith in just a few minutes. Hi, my name is Ann DeSantis, and I'm the director for the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. You can learn about us on our website at nonatus.org. I'm here to tell you today about two great podcasts that I hope that you will tune in. The first Tuesday of every month at 8 o'clock, we have a podcast specifically for Catholics affected by divorce. From 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, go to Philly Nonatus on YouTube to subscribe. In addition, we also have a podcast the last Thursday of every month. That's also at 8 o'clock Eastern Time for 1 hour. And that one is for families in crisis. We have some really great guests coming up soon, so hope to see you then. Please also consider the fact that you can make spiritual direction appointments with us, with our spiritual moderator. All you need to do is go to our website on the contact form and just reach out to us. We'd be happy to hear from you and look forward to setting up an appointment. So we'd love to connect with you. Please share this video and let people know that we're there for families affected by divorce and also families in crisis. Thank you. Family and Faith. I'm here today to tell you about a network that I am so Hi, this is Ann DeSantis. I'm the director for the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. I'm here today to tell you about a network that I am so thrilled to be a part of. It's Fiat Ministry Network, and combined with the work that I do with Patchwork Heart Ministry, I can't say enough good about Fiat Ministry Network. I'd like to invite you to go onto Facebook and also to YouTube and subscribe. You know, sometimes in this past year of 2020, there have been some issues with social media and different things and occurrences that have happened. And unfortunately, Fiat Ministry Network did have one of those occurrences happen to them on their YouTube channel. As much as you can share Fiat Ministry Network with your friends and let them know the wonderful work that they're doing, including some of the shows that I'm involved with, I would just ask you to let them know about it. So I want to thank the producer, Kent Kolhosky, and also Jennifer Sinclair, his friend and coworker that's helped to share so many of the shows and masses and other programs. So thank you again. I wish you a beautiful 2021. Don't forget to subscribe also to Patchwork Heart Ministry and to the Nonatus Foundation at our YouTube channel, which is Philly Nonatus. God bless and take care.
Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network present the Discover Your Mission series.
Now, I had been brought up without any prayer, without Bible, without church, nothing of that kind. And so when my father died, I became suicidally depressed. I had no desire to live. And yet, by the grace of God, whenever I got to the point of actually taking my life, I always had this interior conviction that if I took my life, I would simply find it again on the other side, and it would be permanent misery.
But it wasn't until I became a wife and a mother, and I began to try and pass my faith on to my children, that I realized that everything I knew about Jesus was memorized doctrine.
I was a good man, I was a good father, I was instilling the sacraments into my family. I was definitely not intentional. I was stuck broke in my faith.
But what kind of strength did he have? Jackie did not just have a strength of body or baseball skill. He had a strength inside of his spirit, a courageous meekness that empowered him to play the game.
And I tell him what is going on with me, and he's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, no, I think this is like some sort of miracle, dude. And he's like, okay, of course, but I'll believe it when I see it. Honey, you've been trying to quit, and you've been saying this and saying that, and I'm, his big line to me is, you shouldn't say things, because I never follow through on them. And so this was week after week, month after month. He is looking at me like, this is a miracle. There is no way that you, on your own, could have done this.
So we are called to sing. All of us are called to sing. All of us are called to express ourselves and join our voice into the unity of the church. Often with my choirs, I ask them to listen to each other, to listen to the sound that they make together as one. That's what we're aiming for. Through the harmony or unison, we're aiming for a one sound.
You need to decide, what are you going to participate in? Are you going to participate in the historic Christian idea of the altar of sacrifice, which is in the Eucharist, or not?
Hi, welcome back to Journeys in Faith here on this Friday evening. And as I said at the beginning, we have a wonderful guest, Peter Cavallaro, husband, father, author, and apologist of the Catholic faith. And Peter, I thought we could talk about that. Like, how did you get into being an apologist? Because obviously your faith is really a very, very important part of your life.
Yes, it definitely is. I think it kind of happened gradually. I've always felt that it's incumbent on us all to think about, we spoke earlier about vocation and calling, and, I've always felt that it's incumbent on us, on all of us, to really consider what direction is God, leading us to serve him. And I think the best clues to that is what are the talents and the the various skills that God has endowed you with. What are the opportunities that God has given you? And, when I follow those breadcrumbs, I realized that God definitely wanted me to, I think, in some way deploy my pen, deploy my mind, in his service. I was very blessed to have the opportunity to go and study a lot of great things, including our friend Thomas Aquinas and sort of classical philosophy and theology. I went in college, I went to Georgetown University, which is a Catholic institution that has a lot of opportunities in that regard. And I was also very blessed, kind of in a roundabout way, unintentionally, to kind of cross paths with a very renowned and aged philosopher at the time, who was in residence at Georgetown, named Father James Shaw. He was a Jesuit priest there, and very towering figure, sort of in the philosophical field. Had to have written like 50, 70 books during his career, and highly regarded, but also a masterful teacher and very devoted to his students. And I was not so receptive at first to sort of what his classes were about. But over the course of my 4 years, I really did develop a close friendship with him, and I kind of really the things that he imparted to me, I think, changed my life, and was the single strongest intellectual influence that I had. And so, I mean, on one hand, it's sort of thinking about, and I've always considered myself having, somewhat of a talent for writing. I've always enjoyed it. And so on the one hand, it was kind of taking stock of, where's God leading me to go? And on the other hand, I think it was sort of identifying just a need for, our church to constantly be engaging with the world, which is the mission of an apologist. I mean, apologetics has a very veritable heritage going back to the very beginning of Christianity itself. And at that time, this was a minority viewpoint surrounded by people that were hostile to it, to say the least, and at various times, launching, deadly persecutions of Christians. But at any rate, they were constantly feeling the need to justify and explain why they believed what they believed, and testing the mettle of what they believed against, currents of thought that were, going on around them. And, I think that the need for that kind of engagement is no less today. And I would think of it kind of like apologists as a security force, in order to live in, a great country like this, to enjoy the ability to, raise a family with prosperity, and, have a good education, and enjoy clean water, clean air, political liberties like freedom of expression. To enjoy all this good stuff, you have to have men and women in uniform on the front lines, on the frontiers, fighting to secure that freedom, so that everybody in the middle can enjoy, the greatness of a country like this. But then on the frontiers, sort of, holding it all together. I think that the church, I would love to inhabit the devotional realm, the liturgical realm, the prayerful realm. There's so much, like I said, so much richness and texture to our Catholic Church. But in order to keep that vibrant, and in order to keep it relevant and keep it fresh, we need to, on the frontiers, we need to be engaging with the world. We need to be making sure that we stay, on the one hand, we're anchored to timeless truths. On the other hand, wanting to constantly engage, to make sure, to constantly engage those that don't share our viewpoint, that maybe aren't in the faith, but are, interested in having that dialogue. And so I felt kind of a need to sort of join that endeavor, and, put on the apologetic hat and kind of have that conversation.
Yeah, spoken so well. And I know that you take it very seriously in your life as part of your vocation. As you said, you wear many hats. And I think one of the hats that you wear is trying to educate and do the apologetics with people. And I do think it's making a big difference. And that had led you to write and author your first book, Fragments. I wondered if you could tell us, how did you get the idea for Fragments, and tell us what it's about?
So Fragments is I guess sort of coming to the realization that, at least a part of my vocation would be to, lend my voice to this millennia old conversation that's been going on. Fragments is at heart a book that grapples with a very fundamental topic of the existence of God. And the audience is twofold. The audience is, on the one hand, people of faith, who are interested in probing that topic, and I'm a big believer in always constantly challenging your own views, making sure that you have a sharp understanding of what you believe, so that you feel more genuine and fortified in propounding that creed. But the second audience is non-believers who at least want to explore whether there are answers on the part of the Catholic Church as to, does God exist? What are the arguments for it? And that's obviously a timeless debate. And a lot of ink has already been spilled on that topic. But I guess I kind of wanted to try my hand at that conversation. And Fragments kind of comes out of writings that I had started even in my college days, where I started to just play around with some thoughts about, proofs for God's existence, and, what I might say, or how I might make a more novel spin on these timeless topics. And so the book kind of is, I guess, a result of writings I'd been doing on that topic, but framing these age-old questions in sort of a more, I guess, novel setting. It's semi-fiction. It's part fiction, part nonfiction. It's like loosely, there's some world building involved where there's characters that are having a dialogue among themselves. But in the course of the dialogue, I kind of put forward the substantive ideas that I want to put forward. And it's also got some experimental writing in there. Part of it's creative, part of it's just me sort of just having a little fun exercising my creative juices a little bit. But it's not a textbook. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do, is explore what could be dusty, dry ideas in a form that was not necessarily a dusty, dry format that might attract, readers, my generation, or people that ordinarily wouldn't pick up a theology textbook.
Yeah, you did a great job. And I appreciate that you sent me the book and was able to pull some things from it. And one thing that you mentioned, it's really on the mystery of creation. And you also touch on the problem of human suffering and proofs of the existence of God. Wondered if you could touch on those topics.
Yeah. So, I think those are definitely the fault lines, I think, of where non-believers might, have stumbling blocks if they're going to come into the church. Obviously, they want to know, does God exist? And there's a lot of arguments on both sides. And that's something that you could spend a lifetime grappling with. And I think, a subset of that, which is a very important objection that Christians have to engage, we can't sweep it under the rug, is the problem of suffering, the problem of evil, the problem of tragedy in the face of a loving God. I mean, I don't believe that we could or should sort of flee from difficult questions. I think that we show our strength by engaging with them and putting forth answers as to why we can so joyfully worship God in the face of suffering that's been with us since the beginning. And the mystery of creation, same thing. Another, I think, fundamental question that somebody looking to enter the faith grapples with: where does this all come from? Why are things the way they are? And so the book kind of explores all of these things in turn. And, in the dialogue format that predominates in the book. And just to give a little more about the book, the book imagines a fictional world where gods, in the plural, walk among us, walk among humanity. But at a certain point, something happens such that humanity has hunted them to near extinction. And the principal character of the book, who's known as the God Slayer, is sort of this renowned figure who has hunted down a lot of these gods. And the God Slayer really represents the person who's struggling with their beliefs. And, we would all love to be able to be face to face with God, because we've got a lot of questions we would want to ask him. We have a lot of burning questions: the mystery of creation, the problem of suffering. If we had God in front of us right now, it'd be a very long conversation. Well, in this world, they do have the luxury of having the gods in front of them, and they're filled with rage, and so the God Slayer is the one who is, through his voice, a lot of these objections and questions are coming, and the interlocutors of the God Slayer are the remaining gods. So there's this dialogue going back and forth where the God Slayer is asking questions I think we'd all love to ask, and is getting answers, to those questions. And so that's where I explore, I think, a lot of the questions that I wanted to address.
Yeah, it must have been fun to write the book, because I know that there are topics that you really like. And it was probably not only an educational experience, but also enjoyable for you. And I do hope that people who are watching will consider buying Fragments. I know it's available on Amazon. Tell us I know that it's in paperback. Is it also available in Kindle as well?
Yes, Kindle ebook as well, yes.
Excellent. So that's awesome. I know that it's also recommended for those who wish to strengthen their faith and those who seek to challenge it. And it's a one-of-a-kind book for the 21st century. And I think written by someone your age makes a big difference, because of the experiences that you've had being someone living in this time at your age bracket, who's seen so much change and now is a husband and a father, and experiencing now life going forward as you are living out your vocation. So yeah, truly amazing. So is there any other recommended writing that you would suggest for someone watching? I know we talked about the saints. Were there any books that really inspired you?
Well, and yeah, just to touch on that again, I'll reiterate, any amount of time spent reading about any saints is a great investment. It pays big dividends. You're just going to you'll be astounded every time you read about a saint. I'm 100%. I've never hit a dud. They're all great stories. They've all got great things that they kind of contribute to your life. And that's something to consider, maybe even integrating into a prayer routine, if you want to change it up in terms of readings or other things that you're doing, reading a small blurb about a saint, they're frequently incorporated into sort of, devotional books and such. And I think that's definitely a great additional angle to keep in mind. Yeah, I think that for me, I like to read apologetics sort of in the vein that I wrote, books that, like C.S. Lewis, that will, make arguments for the problem of pain, one of his books, or the existence of God, or, why to believe. And there's also devotional books that, aren't necessarily geared toward, questioning, which has its place, but, within the audience of just believers, just enriching and strengthening, what we believe and why. So yeah, I think there's a good spread of genre that I alternate between, and that's on top of, because I'm a history buff, that's where my true academic heart lies, all the other reading I do. But yes, in the theological realm, there's a couple of great angles to go.
And all the reason to buy the book Fragments. And I just pulled a couple thoughts here: that creative characters, profound human questions, deep theology, combined with the art of writing. That's what Fragments is all about. Pulled together by Peter Cavallaro. So nice work. Now, what about the future? Are you considering writing another book?
Yes. And, I don't have a concrete project yet, but what would typically happen is, I sort of do scattered writings that might evolve themselves into, the jigsaw pieces that will come together, and Fragments itself, no pun intended on the title, did kind of originate with two separate projects that I had started, over the years working on separately. And in fact, that accounts for why it's this hybrid of fiction and nonfiction. On the one hand, I had, these nonfiction writings on, proofs for the existence of God and more doctrine-based questions that I was trying my hand with in college and beyond when I was studying under Father Shaw. But then separate from that, I was writing more poetic, allegorical writings, reflecting on the mystery of creation and doing it in terms that, very much resembled like the beginning of the book of Genesis. And it was sort of the insight that I had was to combine those two things into a single work. And that's where the book came from. So, I do things like that frequently in terms of little scrap projects that I expect, could congeal and turn into a more extended work at a certain point.
We'll look forward to that. And we'll have to have you back again once that's published or before. Now, you're a busy person. You're an attorney, a husband, a father, a person of faith. Prayer is really the key for all of us to growing in our faith. How do you work prayer into your life? And is there a favorite prayer practice?
That's a great question. Prayer is just like exercise or anything else that we know is good for us, but is, something that we need to train ourselves to do. It helps to do as part of a routine, but I'm also a big proponent of it being as well spontaneous because there's authenticity and spontaneity. I don't just call my mother or my best friend or my wife at 3:00 every day, for 15 minutes and then I hang up. The true loving relationships, there has to be spontaneity. There has to be, room to maneuver. But we are busy people and we also need some degree of routine. Otherwise, just like exercise or anything else, oftentimes doesn't get done or doesn't get done enough. So I think the challenge is balancing that. And I think for me, in my experience, what that amounts to is definitely having a routinized prayer episode or episodes, I think most commonly at the end of the day, and in the context of a marital relationship, doing it communally as well. But this is in some ways even more difficult, also sort of getting into the condition where it can happen spontaneously, naturally, proactively throughout the day. I always say that the moments when we should be turning to God are the moments when we least instinctively think to do so, because we're so focused on the crisis at hand. We're so overwhelmed and we're so busy. Like I'm at work, busy day, got a lot of stuff going from all directions, feeling overwhelmed, rather than, fall back on my faith. Too often, I'm not able to focus on that nourishing relationship I have with God because I'm too busy fighting these fires all around me. But I think it takes a lot of skill that I haven't yet mastered to step back and to, fall back on your faith in the moment that you need to, not when the dust has settled, when you're comfortably, everything is sort of over, but to be able to do it in real time, I think is something for everyone to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. We went at the beginning of the show, we were talking about the fact that you're in that millennial age range and how so many people in your age group aren't really honoring their faith and going to church and even thinking about relationship with God or religion for that matter. And we get a lot of people who watch Fiat Ministry Network who are concerned for their kids, their grandkids. They love to see somebody like you at your age who is so devoted to their faith. Do you have any advice for them of encouragement to try to evangelize people in your age group?
Well, one thing I'll say, which I alluded to at the beginning, is, rejoice that God can be found in so many diverse contexts and channels. Chances are, God, there's room for God to be encountered on a person's own terms, no matter what their interests are, what their status in life is, where they're located. I mean, God is there. don't try to fight necessarily, thinking, that God needs to be pigeonholed. There's one route to sort of get someone to have that authentic encounter with the living God. Maybe work within the parameters of somebody's interests, somebody's personality, and there's bound to be a wealth of avenues that can be explored in terms of having the person encounter God on their own terms. Another thing I would say is, this isn't foolproof, but time does have a way of bringing, not always, but bringing people around to God, if they have a sustained, resources around them, a sustained influence, a positive influence that's, extended to them. It may not immediately sink in, but I think one of the good things about our faith is that, it's the real deal. At the end of the day, if it's there for them, and all they'll need to do is to take it, and they'll realize for themselves, maybe at that appropriate time, maybe after, some instigating event causes them to just turn to faith. Once you realize it for yourself, you don't need any more convincing. It's the real deal. And I guess I say it from experience, just because I wouldn't have thought it, maybe a few years ago, but I've seen very, very joyful and surprising turnarounds where people I'd known that hadn't had God involved in their life, with the passage of time and positive influences, really surprised me, and really, thankfully, now have very fruitful relationships, and I'm grateful to see that.
Thanks so much for sharing. Miracles do happen. I've seen them in my own life, and I'm sure that you have too. And I think especially when you have your first child, I don't know about you, Peter, but you definitely start to see so many more miracles starting to unfold in your life. So I'm really happy for you and your wife, Alexandra, and for Peter Henry, right? He's Peter Henry.
Yes.
And God bless him. And just ask everyone to keep you and your family in all of our prayers here at Fiat Ministry Network. Such an honor for us to have you, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us.
My privilege. Thank you so much.
That's right. I'd like to also invite our viewers to go, after the show is over, at some point, please do go to patreon.com/patchworkheartministry, as there will be a show there called 5 Minutes of Faith. And that will be with Peter and I, where we will discuss 3 ways to draw inspiration from the saints. Now, you're seeing up on the screen the Patreon site. And during our commercial break, you learned a little bit about the Discover Your Mission series, which is a wonderful download brought right to you of a church mission. So you don't want to miss out on that. I want to thank our friends from Fiat Ministry Network, Patchwork Heart Ministry. So again, Peter, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. God bless.
See you all next week. God bless.
Journeys of Faith is a production of Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry. For more information about Journeys of Faith, email info@fiatministrynetwork.tv. And be sure to friend, follow, and like us on social media. Just search Journeys in Faith with DeSantis.